The telegram trembled in Margaret Walsh's gloved hands as the stagecoach rattled toward Scottsbluff, Nebraska, carrying her toward a future that promised wealth, security, and an escape from the suffocating poverty that had claimed her father's life 3 months earlier. Margaret pressed her forehead against the dusty window, watching the endless prairie roll past under the harsh June sun of 1882. The telegram had arrived at her boarding house in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago, sent by a matchmaker her late mother's cousin had recommended. Successful rancher seeks educated bride. Property includes 3,000 acres, substantial cattle holdings. Financial security guaranteed. The words had seemed like Providence itself, an answer to prayers whispered in the dark when the landlady knocked demanding overdue rent. She was 22 years old, orphaned, and running out of options. Her father's debts had consumed everything, his gambling addiction a secret shame that only revealed itself after his death. The small inheritance she had expected turned out to be a mountain of IOUs and angry creditors. Teaching positions were scarce, and the ones available paid barely enough to cover a single room and one meal a day. So Margaret had written back, enclosed the photograph taken 2 years earlier when her family still had money for such luxuries, and received an enthusiastic response. Within days, a train ticket arrived along with traveling money and detailed instructions. Mr. Harrison Copper, the matchmaker's letter explained, was 45 years old, a widower without children, seeking a refined woman to grace his substantial home. The stagecoach hit a rut, jolting Margaret against the worn leather seat. The only other passenger, an older woman traveling to visit her daughter, had disembarked at the last stop. Margaret was alone now with her thoughts and her carefully packed trunk containing everything she owned in the world. The landscape changed as they approached Scottsbluff, the flat prairie giving way to distinctive bluffs rising from the North Platte River Valley. The formations were striking, ancient sentinels watching over the town that had grown up along the Oregon Trail route. Margaret had read about the area's history, how thousands of emigrants had passed through on their way west, and how the town had transformed from a temporary camp to a permanent settlement. The stagecoach pulled into town as the sun hung low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Scottsbluff was larger than Margaret had anticipated, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple visible in the distance, and the constant movement of people going about their evening business. Miss Walsh. The driver opened the door, extending a weathered hand to help her down. "You are being met, I presume?" "Yes, Mr. Harrison Copper should be here." Margaret stepped onto the dusty street, smoothing her traveling dress and adjusting her hat. She scanned the crowd gathering around the stagecoach depot, looking for a prosperous rancher. Several well-dressed men stood nearby, but none approached her. "Your trunk will be just a moment, miss." The driver climbed up to the luggage rack. Margaret waited, increasingly aware of curious stares from passers-by. A young woman arriving alone always attracted attention in frontier towns. She held her small bag tightly, trying to appear confident despite the butterflies rioting in her stomach. "Excuse me, Miss Walsh." A voice came from behind her, young and uncertain. She turned to find a cowboy standing a respectful distance away. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard for their living, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots scuffed, his hat battered from use. He held the hat in his hands now, revealing a face that was handsome in a rough, unfinished way. His eyes were a striking blue-green, like the shallow parts of a clear river. "Yes." Margaret waited for him to explain himself. "I am Lucas Reed, Mr. Copper sent me to collect you." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He could not come himself. Disappointment flickered through Margaret, though she tried not to show it. Of course, a wealthy rancher would send an employee. She was being unreasonable to expect a personal greeting. "I see. Thank you, Mr. Reed." She gestured toward her trunk, which the driver had just lowered to the ground. "That is my luggage." Lucas moved quickly to collect it, lifting the heavy trunk with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. "The wagon is just here. It is not far to the ranch." Margaret followed him to a wagon that had certainly seen better days. The wood was weathered. One wheel had been recently repaired with newer boards that did not match the others, and the two horses hitched to it were sturdy but unremarkable. She frowned slightly. This seemed rather humble transportation for a wealthy rancher. Lucas secured her trunk in the back and then helped her onto the seat, his touch brief and respectful. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "How long is the journey?" Margaret asked as they pulled away from the depot. "About an hour if the weather holds." Lucas glanced at the darkening sky. Might rain later. They rode in silence for a while, leaving the town behind. The road wound through grassland dotted with occasional homesteads. Margaret studied the landscape, trying to imagine it as her new home. It was beautiful in its own way, though utterly different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and brick buildings. "Have you worked for Mr. Copper long?" she asked, attempting conversation. Lucas was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "About that, Miss Walsh." "I need to tell you something." Something in his tone made Margaret's stomach clench. "What is it?" He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her, his expression troubled. "There is no easy way to say this. Harrison Copper does not exist." The words made no sense at first. Margaret stared at him, waiting for clarification. "The matchmaker took your money and mine too, along with money from who knows how many others. She invented wealthy ranchers and refined brides, collected fees from both parties, and disappeared. I found out 2 days ago when I went to town and heard you were arriving. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you." The color drained from Margaret's face. "That cannot be possible. I received letters, money for travel." "The money was your own fee, likely, or perhaps from another victim." "The whole thing was a confidence scheme." Lucas's voice was gentle but firm. "I am sorry, truly sorry. I know you came a long way." Margaret felt the world tilting. She gripped the edge of the wagon seat, her knuckles white. "But I have nowhere to go. I spent everything I had to come here." "I know. That is why I met your stage coach." Lucas took a deep breath. "Look, I have a small ranch about 5 miles from here. It is not much, just 160 acres and a cabin. I am barely making it work, truth be told. But you can stay there tonight at least. Tomorrow we can figure out what to do." "I do not understand." Margaret's voice shook. "Why would you help me?" "Because I was where you are right now. I sent money for a bride, expecting someone who wanted to build a life out here. Instead, I got nothing but a letter from the marshal explaining the matchmaker was wanted in 3 territories." He picked up the reins again. Nobody should be left stranded like that. Margaret struggled to process this information. Everything she had planned, every hope she had built, was crumbling. "If you are struggling yourself, how can you afford to help me?" "I cannot, really." Lucas urged the horses forward. "But that is tomorrow's problem. Tonight you need a roof over your head." They rode in heavy silence. Margaret felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past 3 months. Crying solved nothing. The ranch, when they reached it, confirmed Lucas's description. The cabin was small but sturdily built, with a single window beside the door and a stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, in slightly better repair than the house. A chicken coop, A small corral with 3 horses and a vegetable garden completed the property. Everything showed signs of hard work and harder times. Lucas helped Margaret down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The cabin's interior was spare but clean. A single room served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom with a loft above reached by a ladder. An iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, and some shelves constituted the furnishings. "You can take the bed," Lucas said quickly. "I will sleep in the barn." "Mr. Reed, I cannot take your bed." "Yes, you can and you will." He set her trunk down carefully. "I have slept in worse places, believe me. There is some stew left from supper if you are hungry and water in the pitcher. I will be just outside if you need anything." Before Margaret could protest further, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She stood alone in the strange cabin, finally allowing the tears to come. They streamed down her face as the full weight of her situation crashed over her. She was hundreds of miles from everything familiar, with no money, no prospects, and dependent on the charity of a struggling cowboy who could barely support himself. Eventually, the tears stopped. Margaret washed her face in the basin, unpacked her nightdress, and mechanically ate some of the stew, which was surprisingly good. She lay down on the narrow bed, fully expecting to spend the night staring at the ceiling, but exhaustion claimed her quickly. She woke to unfamiliar sounds: roosters crowing, horses neighing, the distant lowing of cattle. Sunlight streamed through the single window. Margaret dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, brushed and pinned her dark brown hair, and ventured outside. Lucas was already at work feeding the chickens. He looked up when the door opened. "Morning. There is coffee on the stove and eggs if you want them." "Thank you." Margaret hesitated on the threshold. "Mr. Reed, we need to discuss my situation. After breakfast." He scattered more grain for the chickens. "Can't think on an empty stomach." Margaret made coffee and scrambled eggs, using the simple supplies in the cabin. When Lucas came in, she had 2 plates ready. They sat at the small table, and for a few minutes the only sound was the scrape of forks on tin plates. "This is good," Lucas said finally. "You can cook." "My mother taught me. She said a woman should know how to run a household efficiently." Margaret set down her fork. "Mr. Reed, I need to return to Philadelphia. Call me Lucas, and I figured you would want that." He pushed back from the table. "Problem is, the stage fare is $20 and I am guessing you do not have it." "No." The admission stung. "I do not have it either. I have about $8 to my name until I sell some cattle, and that will not be for another month at least." He met her eyes. "I am not trying to trap you here, Miss Walsh. I am just telling you the facts. Margaret, if we are being frank, you should call me Margaret." She twisted her napkin in her hands. "What am I going to do?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment. "I have an idea, but you might not like it." "Tell me." "Mrs. Henderson in town runs a boarding house. She mentioned last week that she needs help, someone to cook and clean. It does not pay much, but it includes room and board. You could work there until you save enough for passage east." He paused. "Or there is another option." Margaret waited. "You could stay here and work for me. I cannot pay wages, but I could provide room and board. You would cook and tend the garden and chickens. I would sleep in the barn, keep everything proper. In a month, when I sell the cattle, I could give you the stage fare." He held up a hand before she could respond. "I know how it sounds, but I am desperate for help and you need a place to stay. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. People would talk. People always talk. But Mrs. Henderson would vouch for your character if needed. She is a good woman and she knows I am honest." Lucas stood and carried his plate to the basin. "Think about it. I need to check on the herd, but I will be back by noon. If you decide on the boarding house, I will drive you to town this afternoon." He left Margaret alone with her thoughts. She washed the dishes slowly, considering her options. The boarding house was the respectable choice, but something about it felt wrong. She would be trapped inside all day, serving strangers with no real connection to anything. Here, at least, she could see the sky, feel useful in a different way, but propriety mattered. Her reputation was all she had left. Margaret spent the morning exploring the ranch, careful to stay within sight of the cabin. The garden needed weeding, the chicken coop could use cleaning, and the cabin itself required a thorough scrubbing. Lucas was clearly doing his best, but one person could not maintain everything alone. When he returned at midday, she had made her decision. "I will stay," Margaret said, "for 1 month. You will provide room and board, and at the end of the month you will pay my passage to Philadelphia. We will keep everything proper and businesslike." Lucas's relief was visible. "Agreed. Thank you, Margaret. I am not doing this out of charity," she said crisply. "I need the help as much as you do." Over the next few days, they established a routine. Lucas woke before dawn to work with the cattle and horses. Margaret rose shortly after to prepare breakfast. After the meal, Lucas would head out to the range while Margaret tackled the endless chores around the homestead. She weeded the garden, cleaned the cabin until it shone, organized supplies, and learned to manage the chickens. Lucas returned at sunset. They shared supper, and then he retreated to the barn while Margaret took the cabin. They spoke little beyond necessities at first, maintaining careful distance. But slowly, inevitably, they began to talk. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Lucas asked one evening over a dinner of fried chicken and biscuits. "My mother was the cook for a wealthy family before she married. She taught me everything she knew." Margaret poured more coffee. "Where are you from originally?" "Kansas." "My father had a farm there, but he died when I was 16. My mother passed 2 years before that. I tried to keep the farm going, but the bank foreclosed. I have been working cattle ever since, saving until I could buy this place." He gazed out the window at the darkening prairie. "It is not much, but it is mine." "How long have you had it?" 2 years. "I bought it from a widow whose husband died suddenly. She wanted to go back east to her family." He smiled slightly. "Paid too much for it probably, but I was eager." "Why try to find a bride through a matchmaker?" Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Loneliness, I guess. It is hard out here alone, and I thought maybe I could offer someone a decent life even if I am not rich." He looked at her directly. "What about you? Why come west to marry a stranger?" Margaret set down her cup carefully. "My father died owing more money than I knew existed. The creditors took everything. I had no family left, no real prospects. The matchmaker's offer seemed like an answer to prayer." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose I was a fool, no more foolish than me." We both wanted something better. The conversation shifted after that evening. They began sharing more small details about their lives and hopes. Margaret learned that Lucas had taught himself to read using an old Bible and a newspaper. Lucas discovered that Margaret could speak some French and had once dreamed of becoming a teacher. One afternoon, Margaret was hanging laundry when she heard unfamiliar voices. She looked up to see 3 men on horseback approaching the cabin. Lucas was out on the range, too far away to hear if she called. The men dismounted, and the tallest one, with a thick black beard, smiled in a way that made Margaret's skin crawl. "Well, hello there. You must be the new bride we heard about." "I am the housekeeper," Margaret said firmly. "Mr. Reed is not here at the moment." "Housekeeper," the bearded man laughed. "That what they are calling it now?" He took a step closer. "We are neighbors, the Dalton brothers, just being friendly." "I appreciate that, but I have work to do." Margaret moved toward the cabin door, but the second brother, younger and thinner, moved to block her path. "No need to be unfriendly," he said. "We just want to talk. The lady said she is busy." Lucas's voice cut across the yard. He stood near the barn, having approached silently. His rifle was not pointed at anyone, but he held it in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. The bearded man's smile vanished. "Reed, we heard you had a woman here. You heard correct. Now you can leave. We were just being neighborly." "You were done being neighborly about 30 seconds ago." Lucas did not raise his voice, but something in his tone made the brothers exchange glances. They mounted up, the bearded one tipping his hat mockingly at Margaret. "See you around, Miss Housekeeper." After they rode off, Lucas lowered the rifle. "You all right?" "Yes." Margaret realized she was shaking. "Who were they?" "Trouble. The Daltons run cattle on the property north of here. They are not particular about whose cattle they run, if you understand my meaning." He set the rifle inside the cabin. "I should have warned you. They have been sniffing around trying to pressure me to sell." "Why would they do that? My land sits right between theirs and good water access. If they had it, they could expand considerably." Lucas's jaw tightened. "But I am not selling." That night, Lucas did not go to the barn. Instead, he settled in a chair near the door with his rifle across his lap. "Just a precaution," he said when Margaret protested. She lay in the narrow bed, acutely aware of his presence across the small room. The situation should have felt improper, dangerous even. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. The next morning, Lucas taught her how to load and fire his spare pistol. "I do not want to scare you," he said as they stood behind the cabin, "but you should know how to protect yourself." Margaret proved a decent shot after some practice. The weight of the gun felt foreign in her hand, but she understood the necessity. Life settled into a new rhythm. Margaret found herself thinking less about Philadelphia and more about the work at hand. The garden flourished under her care. The cabin transformed from a bachelor's sparse quarters into something approaching a home. She made curtains from fabric scraps she found in town, repaired Lucas's worn shirts, and even attempted to bake bread in the temperamental stove. Lucas, for his part, worked from dawn until dusk. She watched him sometimes, riding out across the prairie or working with the horses in the corral. He moved with an easy competence born of years of hard work. He was patient with the animals, careful with his resources, and unfailingly polite to her. They talked more in the evenings. Lucas would tell her about the cattle, pointing out landmarks visible from the cabin and explaining his plans for the ranch. Margaret shared stories about Philadelphia, about books she had read, about the world beyond Nebraska. "You miss it?" Lucas asked one night as they sat on the cabin steps watching the stars emerge. "The city, sometimes. I miss theaters and bookshops and the sounds of civilization." Margaret pulled her shawl tighter. "But I do not miss the poverty or the loneliness." Strange as it sounds, I was more alone in a city of thousands than I am here. "I understand that." Lucas leaned back against the post. "Sometimes I think the prairie is the only place that makes sense to me. All that space, all that sky. A man can breathe out here." "Or a woman," Margaret said softly. He looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Lucas looked away first. "You should get some sleep. Morning comes early," but Margaret did not want to go inside. She wanted to sit here with him, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the cool night air on her face. She wanted to tell him that over the past 3 weeks, she had come to look forward to their evening conversations more than anything else in her day. Instead, she stood and went inside because that was what propriety demanded. The next day, Lucas had to drive into Scottsbluff for supplies. "Do you want to come?" he asked. "You could stop at the Mercantile, see the town properly." Margaret agreed eagerly. She had been to the ranch for nearly a month now, and the prospect of seeing other people was appealing. The trip to town took just over an hour. Lucas pulled up in front of the general store, helping Margaret down from the wagon. I need to stop at the feed store and the bank. Will you be all right here? Of course. The mercantile was a treasure trove of goods, from fabric and thread to canned goods and tools. Margaret wandered the aisles, marveling at items she had not seen in weeks. The proprietor's wife, Mrs. Chen, greeted her warmly. "You must be Miss Walsh. I heard you were staying at the Reed place." The older woman's eyes were kind but curious. "Yes, I am keeping house for Mr. Reed. He is a good man, that one. Honest as the day is long, though he has had nothing but bad luck." Mrs. Chen began measuring out flour from a large barrel. "His herd got rustled last spring, lost nearly half his cattle. Then he got swindled by that matchmaker, same as you. Still, he keeps going." Margaret felt a surge of admiration for Lucas that surprised her with its intensity. "He works very hard." "That he does, Mrs. Chen tied the flour bag closed. "Will you be staying on, then?" The question caught Margaret off guard. "I am not certain. My plans are still forming." In truth, the end of the month was approaching rapidly, and Margaret found herself thinking about it with increasing dread. She should want to leave, should be counting the days until she could return to civilization. Instead, she lay awake at night wondering what would happen if she stayed. She was falling in love with Lucas Reed, she realized with sudden clarity. Probably had been falling for weeks without recognizing it. The realization terrified her. He was not the wealthy rancher she had come west to marry. He could barely support himself, let alone a wife. There were no fancy dinners, no beautiful gowns, no security. He was a struggling cowboy with a mortgaged ranch and more debts than cattle. But he was also the most honest man she had ever met. He never made promises he could not keep, never exaggerated his circumstances, never tried to be anything other than what he was. When he spoke, she knew she was hearing the truth. That honesty was more precious than gold. Lucas found her standing in front of a display of ribbons, lost in thought. "Ready?" "Yes." She followed him out to the wagon where he had already loaded supplies. They were halfway home when Lucas spoke. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." Her heart sank. "What is it?" "I sold 3 head of cattle yesterday to a buyer passing through. It was not as much as I hoped, but it is enough." He kept his eyes on the road. "Enough for your stage fare east, with a little extra for you to have until you find work." "Oh." The word came out small and lost. "I know we said a month. It has been just over 4 weeks now. I can take you to town tomorrow if you want to catch the afternoon stage." He paused. "Unless you need more time to prepare." Margaret stared at her hands. This was what she wanted, what they had agreed upon. So why did it feel like someone had hollowed out her chest? "Margaret, can I think about it tonight? Give you an answer in the morning, of course." They drove the rest of the way in silence. That evening, Margaret prepared dinner mechanically, her mind racing. Lucas was quiet too, pushing food around his plate more than eating. "The meal is excellent," he said finally. "As always." "Thank you." More silence. "Margaret." Lucas set down his fork. "I am not good with words, but I need to say something." She waited, her heart pounding. "When you first arrived, I thought I was helping someone in trouble, repaying the kindness others showed me when I was down. But over these weeks, I have come to value your presence here more than I can say." He met her eyes. "You have made this place a home. More than that, you have made me remember what it is like to have someone to talk to share things with." "Lucas, let me finish. I know I have nothing to offer you. I am in debt, barely scraping by with more problems than prospects. You deserve better than a life of hard work and uncertainty. You deserve someone who can give you pretty things and an easy life." He took a shaky breath. "But if you decided to stay, if you wanted to build something here with me, I would count myself the luckiest man alive. I would work until my hands bled to give you the best life I could. I would be honest with you always, even when the truth is hard." I would never lie to you or make promises I cannot keep." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. "I came west expecting a rich rancher who could solve all my problems. Instead, I found a struggling cowboy who cannot even pay himself wages most months." Lucas's face fell. "I understand. I am not finished." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I found a man who works from dawn until dark without complaining. A man who took in a stranger when he could barely feed himself. A man who taught me to shoot and to laugh again and to see beauty in an endless prairie." She squeezed his hand. "I found a man whose honesty is worth more than all the promises in the world." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Are you saying—" "I am saying yes, Lucas Reid. I will stay. I will marry you if you will have me, not because I need security, though God knows I do, but because I love you." Lucas was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "I love you too, I have for weeks, but I did not dare hope you might feel the same." He kissed her then, and Margaret felt everything else fall away. This was right. This was home. They were married 3 days later by the minister in Scottsbluff, with Mrs. Chen and her husband standing as witnesses. Margaret wore her best dress, and Lucas had trimmed his hair and shaved carefully. The ceremony was simple, the words heartfelt. Afterward, they drove back to the ranch as husband and wife. Lucas carried Margaret over the threshold of the cabin, both of them laughing. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reid," he said, setting her down carefully. "It feels strange to be called that." Margaret removed her hat and gloves. "But good strange." That night, Lucas did not sleep in the barn. They lay together in the narrow bed, talking quietly until sleep claimed them. The next weeks were filled with hard work and harder lessons. Margaret learned to milk the cow Lucas bought with the last of his ready cash. She mastered the art of making soap and preserving vegetables. Lucas taught her to ride, and she began accompanying him sometimes when he checked on the cattle. They faced challenges constantly. A late summer drought threatened the grass. Fences needed constant repair. One of the horses went lame and required expensive medicine from the veterinarian in town. But they faced everything together. One afternoon in August, Margaret was hanging laundry when she saw riders approaching. Her hand went instinctively to the pistol she now wore when Lucas was away. But as the riders got closer, she recognized Mrs. Henderson from town, accompanied by 3 other women. "Mrs. Reid," Mrs. Henderson called out cheerfully, "we have come to pay a neighborly call if you do not mind the intrusion." Margaret welcomed them inside, hastily putting coffee on to boil and slicing the cake she had baked that morning. The women settled around the small cabin, their chatter filling the space. "We wanted to make you feel welcome properly," Mrs. Henderson explained. "I know you have been busy getting settled, but it is time you met the other ladies. This is Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Foster, and Miss Yates." The afternoon passed pleasantly. The women shared news and gossip, asked polite questions about Margaret's life in Philadelphia, and carefully avoided anything that might be considered prying. When they left 2 hours later, Margaret felt she had made genuine friends. "They brought you into the fold," Lucas said that evening when she told him about the visit. "That is good. You need friends out here." "I think they were also making sure you were treating me properly," Margaret said with a smile. "And are you satisfied with how I am treating you, wife?" "Extremely satisfied, husband." September brought the fall roundup. Lucas worked 18-hour days gathering cattle, sorting them, preparing for the sale. Margaret kept the home fires burning, literally and figuratively, ensuring he had hot meals and clean clothes. The cattle sale was better than expected. Lucas came home with enough money to pay down a significant portion of his debts and even buy Margaret a new dress. "You should use this for the ranch," she protested when he presented her with the fabric. "I am using it for what matters most." Lucas replied firmly. You work as hard as I do. You deserve something nice. Margaret made the dress herself, a simple design in deep blue that brought out her eyes. She wore it to church the following Sunday, and Lucas could not stop looking at her. You are beautiful, he whispered as they sat in the pew. You are biased, true, but you are still beautiful. October arrived with cooler weather and the first hint of winter. Margaret and Lucas worked to prepare the ranch, stocking supplies and reinforcing buildings against the coming cold. They moved the chickens into a more sheltered coop and laid in extra hay for the horses. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Margaret broached a subject that had been on her mind. Lucas, what would you think about trying to expand the herd next spring? He looked up from the harness he was mending. I have thought about it, but it would require capital we do not have. What if we took in boarders? I could manage a few people easily, cook for them, and do their laundry. Cowboys looking for winter work often need housing. The money could go toward buying more cattle. Lucas considered this. It would be more work for you. I am not afraid of work. They discussed the idea at length, weighing pros and cons. In the end, they decided to try it. Lucas spread the word in town, and within 2 weeks, they had 2 boarders, young cowboys named Tom and Henry, who needed work and housing for the winter. The cabin felt crowded with 4 people, but the arrangement worked. Margaret cooked larger meals and managed the additional laundry. The young men proved respectful and hardworking. More importantly, their board payments provided steady income through the lean winter months. December brought snow and bitter cold. The work became harder, but Margaret found she did not mind. She had grown accustomed to the frontier life, to the early mornings and the constant labor. Her hands grew calloused, her face tanned despite her best efforts with her bonnet on Christmas Eve. Lucas surprised her by producing a small wrapped package. I know it is not much, he said, suddenly shy. Inside was a simple locket on a chain. Margaret opened it to find a tiny photograph, the one she had sent to the matchmaker, carefully cut down to fit. So you are always close to my heart, Lucas said. Margaret threw her arms around him, crying and laughing at once. It is perfect. Absolutely perfect. She gave him a new shirt she had sewn, using fabric she had purchased with egg money saved over months. He tried it on immediately, declaring it the finest shirt he had ever owned. The boarders had gone to town for the holiday, giving Lucas and Margaret rare privacy. They spent the evening by the fire, talking and planning for the future. I want to build you a proper house someday, Lucas said. With a real bedroom and a kitchen you do not have to share with the living area. Someday, Margaret agreed, but this cabin is enough for now. It holds everything I need. Still, a man wants to give his wife better. You give me yourself, that is everything, she kissed him softly. Though I would not say no to a bigger stove, this one is temperamental. Lucas laughed. A better stove, then, that I can manage sooner than a new house. January of 1883 brought a blizzard that lasted 3 days. They were all trapped inside. The world beyond the cabin walls vanished in white. Margaret cooked and mended clothes while the men played cards and told stories. Lucas read aloud from the Bible in the evenings, his voice steady and calming. When the storm finally broke, they dug out through snow that reached past the windows. The cattle had survived, huddled in the sheltered draws Lucas had guided them to before the storm hit. It was a relief to count them and find the losses minimal. February was hard. Tom came down with influenza, and for a week Margaret nursed him, terrified the illness would spread. Lucas moved Tom to the barn despite the cold, trying to quarantine him. Margaret brought hot soup and medicine, sitting with the young cowboy through fevered nights. Tom recovered, but the experience left Margaret shaken. I was so afraid, she confessed to Lucas one night. Afraid he would die, afraid you would get sick, afraid of everything. Fear is part of living, Lucas said, holding her close. But so is hope. Tom lived, we are all fine. You cannot let the fear rule you. His words helped. Margaret understood better now why Lucas never complained about the hardships. Complaining changed nothing. Better to focus on what could be done, what could be controlled. March brought the first hints of spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown prairie beneath. Lucas and the boarders began preparing for calving season. Margaret cleaned the cabin thoroughly, throwing open the windows to let in fresh air. In early April, Margaret realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be certain, then told Lucas over breakfast. He stared at her, his fork halfway to his mouth. A baby, I think so. I am fairly certain. Lucas set down his fork carefully and came around the table. He knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands. A baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Our baby. Are you happy? Margaret felt suddenly uncertain. Happy, Margaret, I am overwhelmed, terrified, grateful, every feeling at once. He kissed her hands. This is incredible news. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Margaret continued her work, though Lucas fussed over her constantly, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous. She tolerated his concern with good humor, knowing it came from love. The boarders moved on in May, heading to ranch work now that winter had broken. Lucas used their payments to buy 6 young heifers, adding to the herd. The ranch was growing, slowly but surely. Margaret's belly swelled as summer arrived. She felt ungainly and awkward, but Lucas maintained she had never been more beautiful. He talked to her stomach in the evenings, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the life they would build together. In late September, Margaret went into labor. Lucas rode for the doctor, but the baby came quickly. Mrs. Henderson, who had come to help, delivered a healthy boy while Lucas waited anxiously in the barn. When he was finally allowed inside, Lucas stood by the bed, staring down at his son with an expression of absolute awe. He is perfect, he whispered. Lucas, meet Samuel Reed, Margaret said tiredly. Samuel Lucas Reed, after no one in particular, just a good, strong name. Lucas held his son for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Hello, Samuel. I am your father. I promise I will do my best by you. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating. Samuel was a healthy baby with strong lungs and definite opinions. Margaret and Lucas took turns walking him when he fussed, both of them surviving on minimal sleep, but they adapted, as they had adapted to everything else. Lucas rigged a cradle he could rock with his foot while eating meals. Margaret learned to cook one-handed while holding the baby. They established routines that worked around Samuel's needs. Winter came again, and this time they were ready. Lucas had built a small addition to the cabin, giving them a separate bedroom. It was not much, just enough space for a larger bed and the cradle, but it felt like a mansion. Samuel grew rapidly, rolling over, then sitting up, then crawling at an alarming speed. Margaret baby-proofed the cabin as best she could, moving anything dangerous out of reach. Lucas built a small fence to create a safe play area. The ranch continued to grow. Lucas had a good year with the cattle, and his reputation for honesty earned him respect in the community. People began seeking him out for advice, for partnership in ventures. He was always careful, never overextending, but slowly their situation improved. By the time Samuel was 2, they could afford to hire occasional help. By the time he was 4, Lucas was discussing building that proper house he had promised. Margaret told him the cabin was still fine, but secretly she was pleased. More space would be welcome, especially if they had more children. And they did. A daughter, Emma, arrived when Samuel was 5. She had Margaret's dark hair and Lucas's river-colored eyes. Samuel was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. 2 years after Emma came another boy, Daniel. The house was finished by then, a sturdy 4-room structure with a real kitchen and bedrooms for the children. The old cabin became a storage building and guest room. The years passed in a blur of work and family and slow prosperity. Lucas never became wealthy, but he built a successful ranch through sheer determination and honest dealing. Margaret became known throughout the county for her cooking and her kindness, always ready to help a neighbor in need. Samuel grew tall and strong, working alongside his father from an early age. Emma proved to have a gift with animals, able to gentle even the wildest horse. Daniel was the dreamer, always asking questions about the world beyond Nebraska. One evening, when Samuel was 16 and preparing to take on more responsibility with the ranch, Lucas and Margaret sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and crimson. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked. "Staying here instead of going back east?" Margaret took his hand, the same way she had that night 20 years earlier when she accepted his proposal. "Not for a single moment. I came west expecting security and comfort. Instead, I found something infinitely more valuable." "What is that?" "A real partnership. A life built on honesty and hard work. Love that grew from shared struggles rather than easy promises." She leaned against his shoulder. "I found you." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "I am the one who got lucky. You took a chance on a struggling cowboy with nothing but debts and dreams. Your honesty was worth more than any promise of wealth could have been. You never lied to me about what our life would be like. You showed me the truth and let me choose." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was teaching Emma to rope a practice post. Daniel was reading under a tree as usual. "They are good kids," Lucas said. "They are. We did well." More years passed. The children grew and began making their own ways in the world. Samuel took over more of the ranch operations, proving himself a capable manager. Emma married a local rancher's son and started her own horse breeding operation. Daniel surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, fulfilling the dream his mother had once held. Lucas's hair turned gray, then white. Margaret's face lined with years of prairie sun and wind. But they still worked together every day, still talked every evening, still found joy in simple things. One spring morning, when they had been married nearly 30 years, Margaret found Lucas standing at the fence, looking out over his land. She came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That telegram you received all those years ago, the one promising a wealthy rancher and an easy life. What about it? I am glad it was a fraud. If you had married that imaginary rich man, we never would have found each other." He turned to face her. "Every struggle, every hard winter, every setback has been worth it because I got to face them with you." Margaret felt tears gathering. After 30 years, this man could still make her cry with his simple, honest words. "I love you, Lucas Reed. I loved you when you had nothing but a mortgaged cabin and a handful of cattle. I love you now. I will love you always. And I love you, Margaret Reed. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood together in the morning sun, two people who had built a life from nothing but honesty, hard work, and love. The ranch spread out around them, a testament to their partnership. 3 grown children carried their values into the world. Grandchildren were beginning to arrive, bringing new life and joy. Margaret thought back to that terrified young woman stepping off the stagecoach in Scottsbluff, expecting a wealthy stranger, and finding instead an honest cowboy with empty pockets and a good heart. She had made the right choice that day, deciding to stay. She had chosen love over security, honesty over promises, and it had given her everything she never knew she wanted. The prairie wind blew soft and warm, carrying the scent of grass and possibility. In the distance, cattle lowed. Closer by, horses whinnied in the corral, the sounds of a working ranch, a living dream. "Should we head inside?" Lucas asked. "I promised Samuel I would help him with those contracts today." In a moment. Margaret wanted to hold this peace a little longer. "Let's just stand here together for a while." So they did. Two souls who had found each other through fraud and misfortune, who had built something true and lasting from the rubble of broken promises. They stood together, as they always had, as they always would, watching the prairie wind move through the grass like waves on an endless sea. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. A new day was beginning on the Reed Ranch, as new days had begun for 3 decades. There would be work to do, challenges to face, problems to solve. But they would face everything together with honesty lighting their way. Margaret smiled, squeezing Lucas's hand. He squeezed back, a simple gesture that carried 30 years of love and partnership. No words were needed. They understood each other completely. Finally, they turned and walked back toward the house, two figures moving through the golden morning light, heading home together. And as they went, Margaret thought once more about that telegram, that promise of a wealthy rancher and an easy life. She had expected security and gotten struggle. She had expected comfort and gotten calluses. She had expected promises and gotten truth. And in that truth, she had found everything worth having. The house door closed behind them, and the prairie returned to its ancient rhythms. But within those walls, the life they had built continued, a testament to the simple truth that honesty is worth more than any promise, and love built on truth will weather any storm. Years later, when Margaret was old and gray, sitting in her rocking chair watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard where she had once hung laundry with uncertain hands, she would tell them stories. Stories about hard times and good times, about a struggling cowboy who had nothing but his word, about taking a chance on truth instead of waiting for promises. And she would tell them, with absolute certainty, that she had lived a rich life beyond measure. Not because of money or ease, but because she had spent it with a man whose honesty had been worth more than gold, whose love had been as constant as the prairie sky, whose partnership had made every struggle worthwhile. The Reed Ranch prospered through the generations, passed down through children who had learned the value of hard work and honest dealing. And always, the story was told of how it began, with a fraudulent telegram, a struggling cowboy with nothing to offer but truth, and a woman brave enough to choose love over security. That was the true wealth they built together, Margaret and Lucas Reed. Not in cattle or land or money saved, but in a legacy of honesty, love, and partnership that would outlast them both, continuing long after they had gone to their rest. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew soft across the Nebraska prairie, people said you could almost see them still, standing together by the fence. Two souls who had found in each other everything they never knew they needed, everything they had always been searching for, everything that made life worth living. The beginning might have been built on lies told by a fraudulent matchmaker, but everything that followed was built on truth. And that truth had set them both free to find the life they were meant to live together, on a small ranch in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, where the prairie met the sky and love grew from honest soil.